Sign over your house or you'll never see your grandkids again. Those words came out of my daughter-in-law's mouth like venom, and I watched her perfectly manicured finger tap against the papers she'd slid across my kitchen table. The same kitchen table where I'd hosted every Thanksgiving for the past 30 years. The same table where I'd taught my son to do his homework. And now, here was his wife, threatening to erase my grandchildren from my life unless I gave her everything. My name is Barbara, and I'm 72 years old. Before I tell you what happened next, I need to know, where are you watching this from? Drop your state or country in the comments. I love knowing I'm not alone in this crazy world, and honestly, after what I went through, I could use the reminder that good people still exist out there. Now let me take you back to where this nightmare really began. My husband Richard died 4 years ago, 46 years of marriage, and then one morning, he just didn't wake up. The doctors said it was his heart, but I think he just couldn't imagine fighting another day. He'd been tired for a while, though he never complained. That was Richard, stoic until the very end. We'd built a good life together. Richard worked as an engineer for Boeing, and I spent 30 years as an elementary school teacher. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. We'd bought our house in 1978 for $65,000 in a modest Seattle suburb. Now it was worth close to $900,000, though I'd never sell it. This house held every memory that mattered. My son Derek was our only child. We'd wanted more, but it just didn't happen for us, so we poured everything into him. Maybe that was our first mistake, giving him too much, expecting too little in return. He was a good kid, though. Smart, funny, kind. At least he used to be. Then he met Vanessa. I'll never forget the first time Derek brought her home. She was beautiful in that calculated way some women perfect. Highlighted hair that looked natural but cost a fortune. Designer clothes with the labels subtle enough to seem classy, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She worked in pharmaceutical sales and made decent money, or so she said. Derek was absolutely smitten. "Mom, isn't she incredible?" he'd whispered to me in the kitchen while Vanessa was in the bathroom. I'd wanted to say, "She's looked at her phone 17 times in the last hour and hasn't asked us a single question about ourselves." But instead, I smiled and said, "She's lovely, honey." Richard caught my eye across the room and gave me that look, the one that said, "Let's talk about this later." We did talk about it later, lying in bed that night. Richard thought I was being overprotective. Maybe he was right. Maybe I just saw something he didn't want to see because Derek was so happy. They got married 14 months later in a wedding that cost $40,000. Richard and I paid for half of it, even though Vanessa's parents were perfectly capable of covering the entire thing. That should have been my first real warning sign. Not the wedding cost, but how Vanessa reacted when Richard suggested we split it evenly between both families. She'd gotten this look on her face, this flash of cold calculation, before the smile snapped back into place. "Oh, Barbara, Richard, you're so generous," she'd said, touching my arm in that way that's supposed to seem affectionate, but somehow feels possessive. Derek's so lucky to have parents who want to invest in his happiness. Invest. That word stuck with me. Not support or celebrate. Invest. Like our relationship with our son had become a financial transaction. The first 2 years of their marriage were relatively peaceful. Derek seemed happy, and they'd visit every few weeks for dinner. Vanessa would bring expensive wine and talk about her sales numbers and the trips they were planning. Derek had started working for her father's commercial real estate company, which paid well but seemed to drain something essential out of him. The light in his eyes dimmed little by little. Then Vanessa got pregnant with their first child. I cried when Derek called to tell us. Richard picked me up and spun me around the kitchen, both of us laughing like teenagers. We were going to be grandparents. After losing so much time feeling like something was missing after Richard's retirement and my own, this felt like purpose rushing back into our lives. Lily was born on a Tuesday in March, and the moment I held her, I understood what people meant when they said grandchildren are the reward for not killing your teenagers. She was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and these huge gray eyes that seemed to look right into my soul. I was completely in love. For a while, things were good. Vanessa seemed softer as a new mother, less focused on appearances and more present with the baby. I'd come over 3 times a week to help, doing laundry, cooking meals, holding Lily while Vanessa napped. Derek was working long hours, and I was happy to support them however I could. Then James came along 22 months later, and with him came a shift I couldn't quite identify at first. Vanessa started making comments. Little things, easy to brush off individually, but harder to ignore as a pattern. "Oh, Barbara, that's an old-fashioned way to do things," when I'd suggest putting the baby on his stomach for tummy time. "We're using the newest research, not what worked in the 80s, when I'd share something from my decades of teaching young children. Derek started backing her up, too, not aggressively, but with this defeated tone that told me he'd already had this argument with her in private and lost. "Mom, Vanessa's really educated about this stuff," he'd say. "She's read all the latest books." As if my 30 years working with children meant nothing compared to some parenting guru's bestseller. I bit my tongue. I smiled. I adjusted. Because that's what you do when you want to stay in your grandchildren's lives. You make yourself smaller, quieter, more convenient. You become whatever version of yourself is acceptable. Richard noticed, but he got sick before he could really confront Derek about it. After Richard died, everything changed. Not immediately. Grief has a way of making people show their better selves at first. Derek and Vanessa were there for the funeral, helping with arrangements, managing the visitors. Vanessa even hugged me at the wake, whispering, "We're here for you, Barbara. You're not alone." For about 6 months, they kept up the appearance of support. Derek would call twice a week to check in. They'd bring the kids by on Sundays. I'd watch Lily, now 4, run through the backyard while James toddled after her, and I'd feel Richard's absence like a physical ache. But at least I had them. At least I still had my family. Then Vanessa's campaign began. It started with concerns about my big house and whether it was too much for me to maintain alone. "Barbara, this place is what? 2,800 square feet? That's a lot for one person. Have you thought about downsizing?" I'd think about it for maybe half a second before remembering that every room held pieces of Richard, pieces of Derek's childhood, pieces of the life we'd built. "I'm managing just fine," I'd say. But Vanessa wouldn't let it go. Every visit brought a new angle. The yard was too much work. The stairs were dangerous. The neighborhood was changing. What if I fell and no one found me for days? What about my retirement funds? Wasn't maintaining this place eating into my savings? She wasn't wrong about the money, exactly. Property taxes had climbed to nearly $9,000 a year. Utilities, insurance, maintenance, it all added up. My teacher's pension and Richard's Social Security covered it, but there wasn't much left over. I'd started being more careful about spending, skipping my book club lunches sometimes, buying generic brands at the grocery store. Derek began echoing Vanessa's concerns, but his approach was softer, sadder. "Mom, I worry about you here all alone. What if something happens?" "I have my medical alert button," I'd remind him. "I have neighbors. I'm fine, Derek." But I could see the script Vanessa had written playing out behind his eyes. She was feeding him lines, shaping his worry into something that served her purposes. The real shift came about 18 months after Richard's death. Vanessa and Derek invited me to dinner, just the adults, no kids. They'd hired a babysitter, which seemed odd for a simple family dinner. Vanessa had made her famous chicken piccata, which I'd tasted before and found mediocre, but I complimented it anyway because that's what you do. After dessert, Derek cleared his throat in that way that meant a rehearsed speech was coming. "Mom, Vanessa and I have been talking. We're concerned about your financial situation and your safety in that big house. We've been looking at some really nice senior living communities. I'm not moving into a retirement home," I interrupted, trying to keep my voice steady. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm 70, not 90. I'm perfectly capable of caring for myself." Vanessa's smile tightened at the corners. "Of course you are, Barbara. We're just thinking ahead, planning for the future. Their thinking ahead became increasingly aggressive over the next few months. They'd send me listings for condos, apartments, even assisted living facilities with amenities they'd highlight like selling points. "Look, Mom, this one has a pool and organized activities," as if I were a child who needed constant entertainment. I stopped responding to their emails. I stopped entertaining their suggestions. And that's when Vanessa changed tactics entirely. She started limiting my access to the grandchildren. At first, it was subtle. Plans would change last minute. "Oh, Barbara, I'm so sorry, but Lily has a playdate we forgot about. James isn't feeling well. Better not risk getting you sick. It's just such a busy week. Maybe next weekend?" Next weekend would come, and there'd be another excuse. Derek would call with apologies that sounded hollow, scripted. "Mom, you know how it is with kids. Their schedules are crazy. We'll make it work soon, I promise." But soon never came. 2 weeks turned into a month. A month turned into 6 weeks. I'd see photos on Vanessa's Facebook of the kids at the park, at birthday parties, at restaurants, living their lives without me in them. She'd post them publicly too, like she wanted me to see what I was missing. I tried confronting Derek directly. "Why are you shutting me out of the kids' lives?" "We're not shutting you out, Mom. We're just busy. And honestly, some of your comments about our parenting have made Vanessa uncomfortable. She feels judged." "What comments? When have I ever criticized your parenting?" "You suggested Lily watch less TV. You said something about James needing more outdoor time. Vanessa feels like you're questioning her choices." I wanted to scream that those weren't criticisms. They were normal grandparent observations, the kind of gentle suggestions that used to be part of regular family communication. But I could hear in Derek's voice that he was defending a position Vanessa had built for him, brick by brick. "Derek, I love those children. I would never intentionally hurt you or Vanessa. If I've said something wrong, I apologize. Please, just let me see my grandkids." There was a long pause. "We'll think about it, Mom. We'll think about it." As if access to my own grandchildren was a privilege they granted based on my behavior, my compliance, my willingness to stay in whatever box they'd designed for me. That was 3 months before the day Vanessa showed up at my door with her papers and her ultimatum. I should mention what Richard and I had set up years earlier after consulting with an estate attorney. We'd been smart about it, or so we thought. Richard had established a family trust, the kind designed to avoid probate and protect assets. The house wasn't technically in my name alone. It was held by the trust, and I was the trustee. Richard and I were co-trustees originally, and after his death, Derek was named as the successor trustee, but only upon my death or incapacity. This meant I controlled everything while I was alive and competent. The house couldn't just be signed over with a simple deed transfer. It would require dissolving the trust or a trustee decision, and there were specific legal procedures involved. Vanessa didn't know about any of this. We'd never discussed the trust's details with Derek beyond the basics, and apparently he'd never mentioned it to her. Or, if he had, she hadn't understood the implications. She saw Barbara's house and assumed it could be transferred like any other property. Which brings me to that horrible afternoon when Vanessa showed up unannounced. I'd been working in the garden, pulling weeds from the rose bushes Richard had planted for our 20th anniversary. My hands were dirty, and I had soil under my fingernails when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and when I opened the door to find Vanessa standing there, in her business casual attire with a leather folder under her arm, my stomach immediately tensed. "Barbara, we need to talk," she said, pushing past me into the house without waiting for an invitation. She went straight to the kitchen table and laid out her folder, pulling out papers that I could see were some kind of deed or transfer documents. Her whole demeanor was different. No more fake sweetness, no more pretense of concern. This was Vanessa in full predator mode. "I'm going to be direct with you," she said, and her voice had this cold, rehearsed quality like she'd practiced this speech. "Derek and I need this house. We've outgrown our place. The kids need more space. And frankly, you don't need all of this square footage. We've been patient, we've tried suggesting alternatives, but you've been stubborn about this." I stood there, still holding my gardening gloves, trying to process what was happening. "Vanessa, this is my home. Richard and I built our life here. I'm not giving you my house." She smiled, but it was the smile of someone who knew they held all the cards. "Here's the thing, Barbara. You love those grandkids, don't you? Lily's starting to forget who you are. James asks about you sometimes, and honestly, it breaks my heart to keep explaining that Grandma's too busy for them." My heart started pounding. "I'm not too busy. You've been keeping them from me." "That's one interpretation," she said, shrugging. "Here's another. You sign these papers, transfer the house to Derek and me, and you get to be a grandmother again. We'll even let you visit regularly. We might even let you stay in the guest room sometimes, though we'd need to establish some boundaries about that. Let me visit. Let me stay. Like I'd be a guest in the home I'd lived in for 45 years. And if I don't sign?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Vanessa leaned back in her chair, completely comfortable, completely confident. "Then you'll never see Lily or James again. We'll move if we have to. Derek's already looking at positions in other states. By the time you could fight this in court, if you even could afford to, those kids won't remember you at all. Is that what you want? To be the grandmother they never knew? The sad story we tell them about family members who chose pride over love?" My hands were shaking. I looked down at the papers she'd spread across my table, my kitchen table, where I'd fed my son breakfast before school for 18 years, where Richard and I had paid bills and planned vacations and laughed over coffee on Sunday mornings. "You're blackmailing me," I said quietly. "I'm offering you a choice," Vanessa corrected. "A generous one, actually. You get to downsize like you should have done a year ago. You get to be in your grandchildren's lives. And honestly, Barbara, you get to stop living in the past. Richard's gone. Holding on to this house won't bring him back." That last line, that calculated cruelty about my dead husband, that's what made something inside me shift. I could feel the tears threatening, but I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. Not yet. "Where's Derek?" I asked. "At work. This is between us, woman to woman. Derek will support whatever I decide. He always does." And that was the truth that hurt worse than anything else. My son had become so thoroughly controlled by this woman that she didn't even need him present for this ambush. She knew he'd go along with it. She'd trained him well. I looked at those papers again. My mind was racing, trying to think of options, trying to find a way out. But all I could see was Lily's face, hear James's laugh. Could I really choose a house over my grandchildren? Would Richard want me to fight this if it meant losing Derek's kids forever? "I need time to think," I said. "You have 2 minutes," Vanessa replied, checking her phone. "I have a showing at 4. Of course she had a showing. This was just another transaction to her, another negotiation. She probably had spreadsheets calculating the equity in my house, planning how they'd renovate, maybe even flip it for profit. I thought about calling a lawyer, but I'd seen enough legal dramas to know that custody rights for grandparents are practically non-existent. And even if I could fight, it would take months, maybe years, and cost money I didn't have. Vanessa knew all of this. She'd probably researched it thoroughly before coming here. So I made a choice. Maybe it was the wrong choice. Maybe I was being weak. But in that moment, faced with losing my grandchildren forever, I couldn't see another way forward. "Give me a pen," I said. Vanessa's smile was victorious, triumphant. She'd won, and she knew it. She pulled an expensive pen from her purse, probably the same pen she used to close real estate deals, and handed it to me. I signed the papers. Every page she indicated, every line she pointed to. My hand was shaking so badly that my signature looked like an old woman's trembling scrawl, which I suppose it was. Each stroke of the pen felt like giving away a piece of Richard, a piece of my history, a piece of myself. If you're enjoying this story and want to see how justice gets served, and trust me, it does, hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what happens next. When I finished signing the last page, Vanessa gathered up the papers with efficient movements, sliding them back into her leather folder. She stood up, smoothing her skirt, and for just a second, I saw something in her face. Not quite guilt, but maybe the faintest recognition that she'd just done something that crossed a line even she hadn't expected to cross. But it passed quickly. "You made the right choice, Barbara," she said, her voice returning to that fake warmth she used in public. "This is better for everyone. You'll see." "When can I see the kids?" I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. "We'll be in touch," she said, which wasn't an answer at all. "Derek and I need to review the paperwork with our attorney, make sure everything's in order. These things take time. Maybe in a few weeks?" She let herself out, and I stood there in my kitchen, feeling like the walls were closing in. I'd just signed away my home. The home where I'd raised my son, where I'd loved my husband, where every crack in the wall and stain on the counter told a story of the life I'd lived. I sank into a chair and finally let myself cry. For 3 days, I existed in a fog. I didn't call anyone. I didn't leave the house except to get my mail. I walked through rooms I'd lived in for decades, touching furniture, looking at photos, trying to memorize every detail before it was taken from me. I stood in Derek's old bedroom, still painted the blue he'd chosen when he was 12, and wondered where everything had gone so wrong. Had I been too lenient with him? Too generous? Had Richard and I created this situation by never teaching Derek to stand up for himself, to think independently? Or was Vanessa just that good at manipulation, that skilled at finding weak points and exploiting them? I kept checking my phone, hoping Derek would call, hoping he'd tell me he'd stop this insanity, that Vanessa had gone too far. But the phone stayed silent. On the third evening, I was sitting in the living room, staring at nothing, when my phone finally rang. Vanessa's name appeared on the screen, and my heart jumped. Maybe she was calling to schedule a visit with the kids. Maybe this nightmare was almost over. I answered, and immediately, screaming poured through the speaker, so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "What the hell did you do?" Vanessa shrieked. "What kind of sick game are you playing?" I was so stunned I couldn't form words. This wasn't the controlled, calculating woman who'd sat at my kitchen table. This was someone unhinged, furious, completely out of control. "The house isn't even yours," she continued, her voice raw with rage. "It's in some goddamn trust. The title company said we can't file the deed, that you don't have the authority to transfer it, that you made me think I was getting this house. You humiliated me in front of my attorney. Derek is furious. How could you do this to us?" And that's when I started laughing. I couldn't help it. The sound came out of me like something that had been trapped for 3 days, maybe longer, maybe for the entire 18 months since Vanessa had started her campaign to isolate me from my family. I laughed until tears ran down my face, until my stomach hurt, until Vanessa's screaming on the other end of the phone became just background noise to my own relief. "You think this is funny?" she screeched. "You fraudulent, you let me believe Derek. Get on the phone. Your mother is insane." I heard fumbling and then Derek's voice tight with anger. "Mom, what the hell? Vanessa's lawyer says the house is in Dad's trust. You can't just sign it over. Did you know this? Did you deliberately—" "Yes, Derek," I said, my laughter finally subsiding into something calmer, colder. I knew exactly what I was doing. The silence on the other end was profound. "The house is in the family trust your father established 20 years ago," I continued, my voice steady now. "I'm the trustee. The house can't be transferred without specific legal procedures, certainly not with a simple quitclaim deed your wife drew up. Any estate attorney would have told you that if you'd bothered to consult one before attempting to extort me." "Extort?" Vanessa had grabbed the phone back. "We were helping you. We were trying to give you options." "You threatened to cut me off from my grandchildren unless I gave you my house," I said. "That's not help, Vanessa. That's blackmail. And I let you think you'd won because I wanted to see exactly how far you'd go. Turns out, pretty far." "You can't do this," Vanessa said, but her voice had lost its commanding edge. She sounded younger suddenly, less certain. "We have those papers. You signed them. We'll get a lawyer who can figure this out." "Good luck with that," I said. "You'll find that the trust documents are very clear about the transfer procedures, and even if you could somehow challenge it, which you can't, you'd need my cooperation as the trustee, which you're not getting." "Then you'll never see those kids again," Vanessa shouted, defaulting back to her only real weapon. "I swear to God, Barbara, you just made the biggest mistake of your life." "No," I said quietly. "The biggest mistake of my life was not standing up to you sooner. I'm done now. I'm done being manipulated, done being threatened, done watching my son turn into someone I don't recognize because he's too weak to stand up to you." "Mom," Derek started, but I cut him off. "You made your choice, Derek. When you stood by and let your wife threaten me, when you let her use your children as leverage, when you became complicit in trying to steal my home, you made your choice. I hope it was worth it." I hung up before either of them could respond. My hands were shaking again, but this time it was adrenaline, not fear. For the first time in 18 months, I felt like myself again. Then I did what I should have done from the beginning. I called a lawyer. The attorney I contacted, Patricia Morrison, was a family law specialist someone from my book club had recommended. She'd been through her own nightmare with manipulative relatives and had developed a reputation for taking cases that involved elder financial abuse. I met with her 2 days after Vanessa's phone meltdown, bringing every document I had: the trust papers, the quitclaim deed Vanessa had made me sign, copies of the text messages showing the systematic exclusion from my grandchildren's lives. Patricia listened to everything, taking notes, her expression growing more serious as I talked. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and shook her head. "Barbara, what your daughter-in-law did isn't just morally wrong. It's potentially criminal. This is textbook elder financial abuse and coercion. You could press charges." The thought hadn't even occurred to me. "I don't want her arrested," I said. "I just want her to leave me alone, and I want Derek to understand what he allowed to happen." "Understood," Patricia said. "But I strongly recommend we send a cease and desist letter outlining the legal issues here. It will make clear that any further attempts at coercion, any continued denial of access to your grandchildren as punishment for not giving them the house, will result in legal action. Sometimes people like Vanessa only respond when they understand they've crossed legal lines." She drafted a letter that was simultaneously professional and devastating. It outlined the attempted exploitation, cited specific statutes regarding elder financial abuse in our state, and included a detailed timeline of Vanessa's campaign of isolation and manipulation. It noted that while the quitclaim deed was invalid due to the trust structure, the attempt itself demonstrated clear intent to commit fraud. The letter demanded that all harassment cease immediately and that reasonable grandparent access be restored. Patricia sent copies to Vanessa, Derek, and for good measure, to Vanessa's father, who owned the real estate company where Derek worked. That last touch was Patricia's idea. "Men like him don't appreciate when family drama affects their business reputation," she explained. The response was swift. Derek called me 6 hours after the letters were delivered, his voice shaky and subdued. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I never intended for things to go this far. Vanessa told me you'd agreed to downsize, that it was your idea. I didn't know she'd threatened you. I swear I didn't know." Part of me wanted to believe him, wanted to accept that he'd been manipulated as much as I had. But another part of me, the part that had signed those papers with shaking hands, that had cried alone for 3 days, knew better. "Derek, you were there when the excuses started," I said. "You heard her canceling visits, making up reasons I couldn't see the kids. Maybe she didn't tell you the exact words she used, but you knew something wasn't right. And you chose her over me. You chose to believe her version of events over your own mother." "I know," he said, and I heard genuine anguish in his voice. "I know, and I don't have an excuse. I should have protected you. Dad would be so disappointed in me." That broke something in both of us. We cried together over the phone, and for a moment, I had my son back. The legal letter did what Patricia predicted it would. It scared Vanessa into compliance. Not because she suddenly grew a conscience, but because her father apparently had a very serious conversation with her about how elder abuse allegations could destroy both her reputation and his business. Derek later told me that his father-in-law had threatened to fire him if this situation wasn't resolved immediately and quietly. Within a week, I received a stiff, formal apology from Vanessa via email. It was clearly written by an attorney and admitted nothing while apologizing for everything. But more importantly, Derek brought the kids over that Saturday afternoon. Lily, now 4.5, was cautious at first, like she couldn't quite remember who I was. But when I pulled out the toy kitchen set I'd kept in my spare room for her visits, something in her face brightened. James, almost 3, was less reserved. He ran to me with his arms up, wanting to be held, and I picked him up and breathed in that perfect toddler smell of apple juice and baby shampoo. Derek sat in my living room while the kids played, looking at his hands. "Vanessa wants to come over sometime to apologize in person," he said, "when you're ready." "I'm not interested in performing forgiveness for her benefit," I replied, "but the kids can visit regularly. That's non-negotiable." "I know, we've worked out a schedule. Every Saturday afternoon, if that works for you." It worked for me. It more than worked for me. Over the following months, Derek and I slowly rebuilt something. It wasn't what we'd had before. That trust had been fractured, and some cracks don't fully heal. But we found a new foundation, one built on honesty about what had happened and his genuine effort to make amends. He started therapy, started questioning the dynamics in his marriage, started remembering who he'd been before Vanessa had reshaped him. Vanessa. And I maintained a cold peace. She never came to my house, and I never asked to go to theirs. We existed in separate orbits, connected only by Derek and the kids. I heard through Derek that she'd been furious about the lawyer's letter, about the humiliation of being called out by her own father, about losing control of the narrative she'd built. But mostly, I heard the sound of my grandchildren laughing in my backyard. I watched Lily help me plant tomatoes in the garden where Richard's roses still bloomed. I read stories to James in the rocking chair that had belonged to my mother. I lived in my house, my home, and I didn't take a single moment of it for granted anymore. The trust Richard and I established did exactly what it was designed to do. It protected our assets and ensured they'd pass to Derek according to our wishes, not according to someone else's manipulation. But more than that, it gave me the leverage I needed to stand up to someone who thought she could take everything from me simply because I loved my grandchildren. Some people mistake kindness for weakness. They mistake a grandmother's love for desperation. Vanessa learned the difference. And I learned that sometimes the best way to win is to let someone think they've already won, right up until the moment they discover they haven't won anything at all.